This guy is the Thanos of powerlifting. He's absolutely speedrunning the sport, destroying everyone in his path, stacking accolade after accolade on his resume. He is inevitable. He's the limit breaker. He is, of course, Colton Engelbrecht, aka the strongest human being to ever exist. In this video, I'm going to go through the crazy achievements he's already added to his resume at just 24 years old. Can you believe it? And where he's going to go from here, and the potential next future accolades he's going to add, and the next goals he's going to look to hit, which he probably will, because it doesn't look like he's slowing down anytime soon, and it doesn't look like there's anyone out there who can stop him. He is genuinely inevitable, a real breaker of limits. Now, I know you're thinking, what am I doing making a video about someone on the untested side of powerlifting? I've said a lot of things about this side of the sport, but I've also said, and I am first and foremost a fan of the sport and a fan of people lifting heavy things. So as much as I do not like how the untested side of the sport is run, I absolutely had to make a video about Colton, because he is absolutely, there's literally no superlatives. He is ridiculous. So let's go through what Colton has done and what he probably will do in the future. Okay, so first off, he started in the 110 kilo weight class, where he set the 110 kilo all-time world record. Now, he lifts raw with wraps predominantly. We'll cover potential sleeved lifts in the future later in this video, but there he is with a 440 kilo squat, absolutely nuts, 245 kilo bench, which is his relatively weaker lift, but only because his squat and deadlift are absolutely out of this world, and 435 deadlift. So this locked in a 1120 total, which he did in June of last year at just 23. So this also made him the strongest junior of all time, yet another infinity stone to add to his gauntlet there. So this broke the record held by Yuri Belkin all the way back in 2019 of 1070. So he broke a 5-year-old world record by 50 kilos as a junior in the 110 kilo class. Absolutely ridiculous, over 10 times body weight. Then he moved up to the 125 kilo weight class, which is the next weight class up in untested powerlifting, where he also broke this world record with an 1155 total, a 465 kilo squat, 260 kilo bench. This was done at Big Dogs in November last year, which is one of the biggest untested meets there is. And there's 430 kilo deadlift. So an 1155 total. He's still only 24 years old when he did this. And this beat the previous record held by Zahir Kudayarov, who was 1112.5 all the way back in 2015. So this was almost a 10-year-old world record that he broke by over 40 kilos. And he only weighed around 120 as well, so he didn't fill out the 125 weight class. Okay, so he broke 2 insanely prestigious all-time world records held by absolute powerlifting legends in Yuri Belkin and Zahir. So what's next? He goes, screw weight classes, I'm just going to become the strongest powerlifter ever. And that's exactly what he did. About a month ago in March of this year, he broke the all-time world record total regardless of weight class with a ridiculous 1200 kilos, with a 470 kilo squat, mental, a 260 kilo bench. This was his second attempt. He actually missed a 600 pound attempt on his third. It's crazy that he did 1200 and didn't even go 9 for 9. And a 470 kilo deadlift for a 1200 kilo total. Again, still only 24 years old currently when he did this. And this broke the record previously held by Dan Bell of 1182.5, a record that has stood since 2021. So a record that has stood for 4 years. And again, Colton didn't just chip it, just like he did with the previous weight class world records. He smashed it by, in this case, 17.5 kilos. And again, his body weight, I mean, you would think surely he would at least had to have filled out the 125 kilo weight class. You'd be wrong, because his body weight was still 120 kilos. So he totaled 1,200, a 10 times body weight total at 120. Absolutely mind-boggling. And what's also mind-boggling is you look at the previous holders of the all-time world record total. Andrei Milanichev held the world record with 1140. He did that at about 160 kilo body weight. Petr Petras, who broke that record from Milanichev with 1160, did that weighing 170 kilos. And Dan Bell, who I mentioned, held the record prior to Colton with 1182.5, weighed 180 kilos. So the previous holders of the biggest raw with wraps total ever in powerlifting outweighed Colton by anywhere from 40 to 60 kilos. Colton beat all these guys that much lighter than them. That's over 100-pound body weight difference against these guys. Nuts. Oh, and by the way, if you're more of a fan of relative strength rather than absolute strength, Colton is also the strongest ever by that measure, because that performance locked in the biggest dot score ever in raw powerlifting, 688.33, which broke the mark previously held by John Hack, who was 665.75, which was raw with sleeves, not with wraps, but we'll get to that in a sec. So speaking of sleeves, what is next for Colton? He has broken 2 prestigious weight class world records. He has totaled the biggest total ever in human history. He's got the biggest dots ever, so he objectively is the strongest man ever when it comes to both absolute strength and relative strength. And because the untested side of powerlifting is so dead, what is left for him to do? Well, there's still a few things. The first is taking the all-time world record total in sleeves. So the current all-time world record total in sleeves is held by Jesus Olivares, 1152.5, which he did in Sheffield 2023. So if you do the math and you take Colton's bench and deadlift from his previous comp, his best ever competition lifts being a 260 bench and a 470 deadlift, he would need a 422.5 raw squat. Now, recently, so just a couple of days ago, he posted this, which is his best ever sleeved squat that I've seen him do, which is 340 kilos for 8. I actually think this is bare knees, not even sleeved. So he's gone all the way from wraps to just bare knees, which is kind of wild. 340 kilos for a set of 8. And, I mean, maybe ever so slightly higher, but he always seems to squat slightly higher in training and then sinks it without issues come competition day. And again, noting that this is bare knees, I'm pretty sure anyway, not even sleeves, you'd think would maybe get a bit more out of the sleeves. But if you put this into an estimated 1 rep max calculator, which I know is not an exact science by any means, it gives you 425, which is pretty much bang on what he would need to out-total Jesus in sleeves. Now again, factor in that, you know, he'll be wearing sleeves and improvements that he would make on his bench and on his deadlift, which seem to be perpetually improving. I think that if he decides to compete in sleeves, which I know he's talked about, and I think he's got goals to do it this year, I think he absolutely will be able to take the heaviest ever total in sleeves and add yet another prestigious accolade to his gauntlet there. Okay, so what else? The biggest dots ever in sleeves. I mentioned before that he broke the previous dots record held by John Hack. John Hack did it in sleeves. Colton beat it in wraps. Technically in sleeves, John Hack is still the guy. What would it take for Colton to overtake him? Well, like I said, John Hack, his best ever, or the best ever raw without wraps dot score 665.75. He did that via a 1,013 kilo total at a body weight of 87.2. So well and truly in the 90 kilo class, which is mental. He did that September last year. So if we do the reverse math there for Colton, assuming his body weight stays the same as what it was in his last performance, which was 120.4, he would need an 1162.5 kilo raw sleeved total. Which again, if we take his best ever bench and his deadlift, which sleeves / wraps don't affect your bench and deadlift, right? It's only a difference in squats. So 260 bench and a 470 deadlift means he would need a 432.5 raw squat. Now, I said before his best ever squat set without wraps was that 340 set of 8, which is estimated 1 rep max of 425 roughly. So 432.5 is, maybe potentially top end for him there. However, he's also still improving. In fact, if you take his best ever gym lifts on his bench and deadlift, his best ever bench is 270 kilos, which he did for a rep, and then he attempted to double it. Who the hell attempts to double a bench PB? That's psychotic behavior. But I expect nothing less from the limit breaker. Now, he didn't quite get the second rep, but he still got it for a single. So 270, that's 10 kilos on his competition PB, which means that's 10 kilos off the raw squat number he would have to hit. And his best ever competition spec deadlift is his 480 kilo deadlift, which he did in March, about a month ago, just before his previous competition. 480, comp standard, hook grip, raw deadlift, absolutely wild. And again, that's 10 kilos above what his best ever deadlift is in competition. So if you add those 20 kilos to his theoretical total, he would need to squat 20 kilos less than that, which is only 412.5. And we've already said how we're pretty sure he can squat around 420, 425 with sleeves at least. So I do think in his next performance, when he competes in sleeves, if he competes in sleeves, not only will he out-total Jesus for the biggest total ever, but he'll also beat John Hack's dot score, just to add that to his resume as well. Okay, so what's next after that? After he becomes the strongest ever in absolute terms, raw and raw with wraps, and also the strongest ever in relative terms, raw and raw with wraps, what is left to do? Well, individual lift world records. Now, needless to say, in his weight class, he holds the squat and deadlift world records, but the biggest squat ever, he's also not that far off, and he's also said this is a goal of his, and I don't doubt he'll get there. So the current biggest squat ever is held by Dan Bell, who did 505 over 1,100 pounds raw with wraps back in 2021. Dan Bell was definitely a squatter. It was his best lift, and he made up a big chunk of his total. So 505 there from Dan Bell. Now, Colton's best squat, like I said, is 470. And I'll let all his attempts from his previous comp play out so you can see that 470, I don't think necessarily was maximal. I think he had more left based on how quick these squats look. But I think his squat is definitely his most mind-blowing lift, because usually the reason why all the best super heavyweight powerlifters have to be so big and chunky is because they need that, cushioning to be able to squat over 1,000 pounds. Colton is relatively lean, definitely far from being fat, and he doesn't need that, and he's still able to squat over 1,000 pounds. And you can see that 470, I think he had more in him. I know he's doubled like 1,000 pounds or so in training as well. So I think he's only 35 kilos away, potentially gains a couple kilos of body weight. He might not even need it. I do think that he will be able to squat over 505. Now, that is his squat world record in a full meet. The biggest squat ever done raw with wraps is actually 525 by Vlad Alhazov, which was done in a squat only event. It wasn't full power meet. That might be potentially a bridge too far for I mean, you can't doubt this guy. He's not even human, right? But that's a 55 kilo increase. That's quite big. 35 is still big, but I think Colton can get there. The next thing that he can do after that is the biggest deadlift ever. So similar to his squat, his deadlift is absolutely nuts. In fact, he has the same competition PB with 470. The biggest deadlift ever done belongs to Danny Grigsby, 487.5, 1,075 pounds, which he did back in 2022. This is back on the Kabuki bar, which no longer exists, but Colton doesn't need it because only humans need bar whip. But Colton's best lift is 470 kilos, which we've already seen his 470 kilo competition deadlift. However, he also has done this 480 kilo double, which he did about a week ago. Now, yes, this is with straps, but still 480 for 2 reps. I mean, the strength levels to do that, that's only 7.5 kilos below the biggest ever comp deadlift. And if he can just keep those thumbs intact, I believe he has the strength for more than 487.5 right now. In fact, he's actually attempted 500 kilos. This was his unofficial 4th attempt that he did in his previous meet after his 470 kilo third. He threw 500 kilos on the bar, which wouldn't have counted towards his total, but he thought, why the heck not? And he attempted 500 kilos in a powerlifting competition. Only the second man to do that after Dan Grigsby, and he got it off the ground, and he got it pretty damn far up. In fact, he got it about an inch before lockout. I'm not even sure what the cause of failure to that was. I don't know whether if it was a thumb tear thing, or it didn't look necessarily like a strength thing. It looked like he damn near locked it out. But yeah, I think Colton will be able to deadlift 500 kilos in competition and shatter Danny Grigsby's deadlift record. So he will be the biggest squatter and biggest deadlifter ever, despite only weighing 120 kilos or thereabouts anyway. So after that, he would essentially have completed the sport of powerlifting, right? He would have been the strongest in absolute terms, in relative terms, raw with wraps, the biggest squat ever, the biggest deadlift ever. The biggest bench ever is probably out of his reach. The biggest bench ever, obviously, Julius Maddox, 355. In a full power meet, you had Thomas Davies with 325, which is about 50 kilos ahead of Colton, or a bit more than that actually. So I don't think he's going to quite get to that, but I do think he will be capable of a 500 plus squat and a 500 plus deadlift, which is absolutely wild to say. He's the only person to ever squat and deadlift 1,000 plus pounds, both squat and deadlift over 1,000 pounds in the same meet, and I believe he'll be the first to hit 500 as well on both lifts in the same meet. So after that, because he would complete the sport of powerlifting, it would be on to Strongman, which I know he's spoken about before, that he sees himself going down that world's strongest man route after he completes powerlifting, which, like I said, he only has these things left to do, which he could do in the next 1 to 2 to 3 competitions. It could only take him a year to do everything else that's on this list. So we'd move into Strongman, and obviously there's plenty of accolades in Strongman, but the big one is the deadlift. So the biggest ever Strongman deadlift, depends who you ask, but it's either Eddie Hall's 500, which he did back in 2016, probably the most single legendary lift in human history, I believe. 500 kilos, and unofficially / officially / who the heck knows, Hafthor chipped it by a kilo 4 years later in 2020. I'm not going to go into which record I believe is more legit, but let's just say they both share a deadlift world record at the moment. 500 and 501 respectively by them. Now, obviously in Strongman, the big thing is you have to deadlift conventional, not sumo. Now, what makes Colton unique, well, one of the many things, just like I said, how he doesn't fit the typical fat powerlifter mold that you would expect of a 1,000 plus pound squatter, he also doesn't fit the classic, the look that you would expect of a 1,000 plus pound deadlifter. Someone like Danny Grigsby, Kyler Woolham, Jamal Browner, Yuri Belkin, those guys who have pretty wide stances, real crazy deadlift leverages. It's far and away the best lift. Colton is a lot more balanced across the lifts, obviously with his huge squat. And you wouldn't say he has crazy small range of motion. The bar travels quite a bit. Yes, he has pretty long arms, but his stance is pretty narrow. It's just like the closest sumo deadlift to a conventional. If you look at the all the other guys that pull sumo 1,000 plus pounds, in my opinion anyway. So I do think he'll transition pretty well into this. Plus the fact he's just the strongest human being ever, I think also would help. But he has done some conventional sets before. So his best ever conventional set is 340 kilos for a set of 6, actually 2 sets of 6. He did this July last year. And he also did 310 for 9 and 330 for 7 in the weeks leading into this. Now we know since July last year he's gotten heaps stronger, because back in July last year he was still a 110 kilo lifter. Now he's a 120 and he's gotten way stronger. So I think it's safe to say he would be quite a bit more than this. Also, not to mention that this was done raw, so obviously straps but no suit. It was done for 2 sets of 6, so obviously not maximal. Looks like it's more of an accessory movement for him at this point. And, you know, probably wasn't peaked for it, probably wasn't too, you know, in tune with the movement, having done a full training cycle with it. Now, yeah, all those things considered, I do think Colton can push his conventional way more than that. All those sets that I mentioned, including this 340 for 6, roughly gives an estimated 1 rep max of 400-ish, which I know is still super rough. I'm sure Colton would have the strength to pull over 400 kilos conventional today if he wanted to. I believe that, you know, you put him on a suit, you make him train conventional exclusively for a couple months, and I don't doubt that he would be pulling close to 1,000 just based on how strong he is. Can he get to 500? This is probably the record on this list, record/accolade on this list that he is the furthest away from getting. Everything else that I presented here, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he achieves within this next year. But this one, I believe, will take a bit longer. However, I do think he'll be able to do it. Again, strength. That's all it is. He is just hands down the strongest guy to ever exist. And yeah, I just think he will absolutely annihilate Strongman, and he will annihilate the deadlift world record, because he is the Thanos of powerlifting, and he could well become the Thanos of Strongman as well.